Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the Tanakh.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I know that a lot of you are probably familiar with the basics, but for this deep dive, we really want to uncover some of the hidden gems
Mhm.
and connect those to the larger picture.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what makes exploring a text like the Tanakh so fascinating. It's not just about the individual stories, but about understanding those overarching themes and how they all kind of weave together to create this incredibly rich tapestry of history, faith, and the human experience.
Right, and to kind of give everybody a taste of what we'll be unpacking today, think about things like creation and humanity's purpose, the complex relationship between humanity and the divine, the establishment and consequences of covenants, the challenges of leadership and social justice, and then those enduring questions of faith, suffering, and exile.
Right.
It's a lot to cover, but I'm excited to dive in.
Me too. And what's so fascinating about all of this is how these themes play out, not just in those grand narratives, but also in the more intimate stories, in the poetry, the wisdom literature, even the laws. It's all connected.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning
Huh.
with the book of Genesis.
Right.
It's like the foundational myth of the entire Tanakh, right?
Yeah.
It kind of sets the stage for everything that follows.
Exactly. Yeah, we're introduced to this very powerful God who speaks creation into existence, culminating with humanity made in his image. And this idea isn't just like a poetic flourish, it's a theological concept that has reverberated through centuries of thought.
Right, it's very loaded with meaning. What does it actually mean for us to be made in the image of God? What responsibility does that imply? Does it give us dominion over the natural world? Or does it suggest something more nuanced about a relationship with creation?
I mean, those are the key questions, aren't they? And Genesis doesn't really offer any easy answers. It presents a complex picture of humanity, capable of great love and creativity, but also prone to disobedience and destruction. And we see this in the stories of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, even the flood narrative.
The flood is such a striking image, isn't it? It's almost like a cosmic reset button after humanity's descent into wickedness. But then God establishes a covenant with Noah, promising to never again destroy the world by flood. It's a sign of hope, a new beginning, but also a recognition that the potential for evil hasn't really disappeared.
Exactly. And that tension between hope and the reality of human fallibility is kind of woven throughout the entire Tanakh. The covenant with Noah is just the first of many, each one kind of building upon the last, shaping that relationship between God and humanity.
And that brings us to the Tower of Babel, another story packed with symbolism. What do you make of this tale of human ambition leading to division and the scattering of languages?
For me, it really highlights the dangers of overreaching, of trying to usurp God's authority. But it also kind of speaks to the power of language to both unite and divide. It's a story that I think still resonates today. As we grapple with the complexities of globalization and the challenges of communication across cultures.
It's almost like a cautionary tale about the need for humility and the importance of recognizing our limits, that we can achieve great things, but not at the expense of our relationship with God or with each other.
And that emphasis on relationship, on covenant, is really key to understanding what comes next. The focus kind of shifts from humanity as a whole to a particular family, the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Okay, so we're moving from cosmic narratives to more intimate family sagas, but even within these personal stories, those big themes continue to play out. Abraham's journey, his willingness to leave everything behind and follow God's call, sets a precedent for the idea of chosenness and the challenges that come with it.
Absolutely. It's a journey marked by both faith and doubt, obedience and questioning. Remember when God asks Abraham to sacrifice his son, Isaac? It's a test that really pushes Abraham to the limits of his faith, raising profound questions about the nature of sacrifice and the limits of human understanding.
That story has always been incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And troubling for me. On one hand, it speaks to the depth of Abraham's faith, his willingness to trust God even when it seems impossible. But on the other hand, it raises those ethical questions that continue to be debated even today.
And that's what's so fascinating about the Tanakh. It doesn't shy away from those difficult questions. It presents a very complex picture of faith, one that involves wrestling with doubt, grappling with those moral dilemmas, and ultimately surrendering to a God whose ways are not always our ways.
And that wrestling continues with Isaac and Jacob, Abraham's descendants. They inherit the covenant, the promise of land and offspring, but their lives are filled with family drama, deception, and struggles for power. It's almost like a soap opera.
Well, it is a family saga after all. But within those messy human interactions, we see God's plan unfolding. guiding events and individuals towards his ultimate purpose. Jacob's wrestling match with the angel, for example, is a really powerful image of the struggle to understand the divine, the boldness of challenging God, and the transformative power of encountering the sacred.
Right. Jacob emerges from that encounter with a new name, Israel, signifying his transformation and the birth of a new nation. It's almost like a metaphor for the ongoing struggle between humanity and the divine.
Precisely. Yeah, the story reminds us that faith isn't about passive acceptance. It's about actively engaging with the divine. It's a journey of questioning and transformation. And that journey takes a dramatic turn with the book of Exodus. We move from the intimate world of the patriarchs to the grand stage of national liberation.
Exactly. It's the story of Moses leading the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, facing down Pharaoh, and witnessing some truly epic events. Plagues, the parting of the Red Sea. Talk about a cinematic spectacle. But it's more than just cool special effects, right?
Right.
These events solidify the Israelites' identity as God's chosen people, with all the responsibility that entails.
Absolutely. And that responsibility is spelled out in the giving of the law at Mount Sinai. The Ten Commandments, along with that very detailed system of laws and rituals outlined in Exodus and Leviticus, establish the framework for a covenant relationship between God and Israel.
Okay, so we've moved from creation to covenant, from family saga to national liberation. And now, with the giving of the law, we're entering a new phase, a period of defining what it means to live as God's chosen people. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of those laws, I'm just curious, what stands out to you about this progression, this unfolding of God's plan?
For me, it's the increasing specificity of God's interaction with humanity. We start with these very grand universal narratives, then we move to a particular family line, and finally to a specific nation with a defined set of laws and rituals. It's almost like a process of zooming in, focusing on a particular people and their very unique role in God's plan.
That's a great observation, and it makes me wonder, how do those specific laws and rituals reflect the broader themes that we've been talking about? How do they connect back to ideas like creation, covenant, and the image of God?
That's a fantastic question, and one that's at the heart of understanding the Tanakh. But before we dive into that, let's take a closer look at those laws and rituals themselves, starting with the Ten Commandments, perhaps the most iconic set of rules in human history.
Okay, so let's break down those commandments
Yeah.
and see how they reflect the values and principles that underpin the entire covenant relationship. Because as you said earlier, these aren't just random rules. They're meant to guide the Israelites in living out their unique role in God's plan.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Tanakh. We left off talking about the Ten Commandments, that cornerstone of the covenant relationship between God and the Israelites.
Right, so the foundational legal code, right?
Yeah.
Establishing those basic principles of how they're supposed to live as God's chosen people. But it's not just about following rules, is it? There's a deeper purpose there, a connection to those broader themes we've been discussing.
Absolutely. The Ten Commandments aren't just these arbitrary dictates. They reflect a deeper understanding of God's character and his intentions for humanity. For example, the very first commandment, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me, establishes that exclusivity of the relationship between God and Israel.
It's like setting those boundaries right,
Yeah.
drawing that clear line between the God of Israel and all those other deities worshipped by surrounding nations. It's about loyalty, commitment, and recognizing the source of their liberation.
Exactly. And the second commandment, prohibiting the creation of idols, reinforces that idea of God's uniqueness. He can't be contained or represented by any physical image. It's about cultivating a spiritual understanding of the divine, one that goes beyond the tangible.
So it's about moving away from a more primitive, superstitious kind of religion towards a more abstract, ethical understanding of faith. It's about internalizing those values rather than just, performing rituals.
Precisely. And those ethical values are further developed in the commandments that deal with interpersonal relationships, honoring parents, prohibiting murder, adultery, theft, false witness, and coveting. These commandments establish the basic principles for a just and harmonious society.
Right. It's about recognizing the inherent dignity of every human being, created in the image of God, and treating each other with respect and compassion. It's about building a community based on trust, honesty, and a commitment to justice.
And that commitment to justice isn't just an abstract ideal. It's really woven into the fabric of Israelite law, as detailed in the books of Exodus and Leviticus. We see it in the laws regarding the treatment of the poor, the protection of widows and orphans, the fairness in legal proceedings, even the regulations regarding Sabbath rest and debt forgiveness.
It's almost like a social safety net, right? A system designed to protect the vulnerable. and ensure a more equitable distribution of resources.
Yeah.
It's not about achieving perfect equality, but about creating a society where everyone has a chance to flourish.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that these laws were given within a specific historical context. The Israelites had just emerged from slavery, and these laws were meant to guide them in building a new society, one that was radically different from the oppressive systems that they had known in Egypt.
So it's about breaking free from those old patterns of exploitation and establishing a new model based on justice, compassion, and a recognition of their shared humanity. It's a radical vision, even by today's standards.
And that radical vision continues to unfold as we move into the books of Numbers and Deuteronomy. These books detail the Israelites' journey through the wilderness, their struggles and triumphs, and the final preparations for entering the Promised Land.
Right, it's like a 40-year boot camp, testing their faith, refining their character, and preparing them for the challenges of nationhood. It's a period of both grumbling and growth, disobedience and moments of profound revelation.
And throughout this journey, Moses continues to reiterate the importance of the covenant, reminding the people of their obligations to God and to each other. Deuteronomy in particular is like a farewell address, a final exhortation to remember the law, to live faithfully, and to choose life over death.
It's a powerful reminder that freedom isn't just about escaping oppression. It's about making choices, taking responsibility, and living in accordance with those values that were forged in the crucible of their shared experience.
And that leads us to the book of Joshua, where the Israelites finally cross the Jordan River and begin the conquest of the Promised Land. It's a period of both victory and violence as they establish themselves in a new territory, displacing existing inhabitants.
This is where things get a bit more complicated, right? How do we reconcile the violence depicted in Joshua with the ethical principles we've been discussing? It's a question that has troubled readers for centuries.
It's a challenging question, and one that demands careful consideration. Some scholars argue that the conquest narrative should be understood within their ancient Near Eastern context, where warfare was a common means of establishing territorial control. Others emphasize the theological message, seeing the conquest as a fulfillment of God's promise to give the land to his chosen people.
So there are different ways of interpreting these narratives, each with its own set of challenges and implications. It's a reminder that the Tanakh doesn't offer easy answers. It invites us to wrestle with complex questions and grapple with the ambiguity of human history.
And that wrestling continues as we move into the book of Judges, a period of cyclical backsliding and deliverance. The Israelites, having established themselves in the land, repeatedly fall into idolatry and disobedience, prompting God to raise up judges to deliver them from their enemies.
It's almost like they're testing the limits of the covenant, pushing the boundaries of God's patience. They experience the consequences of their choices, the pain of exile and oppression. But God, in his mercy, always offers a path back to redemption.
And each judge, from Deborah to Gideon to Samson, embodies a different aspect of leadership. They're flawed individuals, capable of both great feats of courage and moments of moral failing. It's a reminder that leadership isn't about perfection. It's about navigating those complex situations, making difficult choices, and ultimately relying on God's guidance even when things get messy.
It's a very human picture of leadership, isn't it? It's not about these larger-than-life figures who always get it right. It's about recognizing our own weaknesses, our need for guidance, and the importance of humility in the face of power.
And that leads us to the books of Samuel and Kings, which mark a major transition in Israelite history. The establishment of the monarchy, the people, tired of that cyclical pattern of judges and apostasy, demand a king to rule over them.
So they're looking for stability, a more centralized form of government. But is this a rejection of God's rule? Are they trying to replace the divine king with a human one?
It's a complex question, and the Tanakh offers a nuanced perspective. On one hand, the desire for a king is seen as a rejection of God's direct rule. Samuel warns the people that a king will demand their sons and daughters for his service, their fields and vineyards for his enrichment. But on the other hand, God allows the monarchy, recognizing that it's part of his plan for Israel.
So it's not necessarily an ideal situation. But God is willing to work within the limitations of human desire and the complexities of political realities.
Exactly. And the story of the first king, Saul, really highlights those complexities. He's chosen by God, but ultimately falls from grace due to his disobedience and pride. It's a reminder that even those in positions of power are accountable to God, and that true leadership requires humility and obedience.
And then comes David, the shepherd boy who becomes a legendary warrior, a poet, and ultimately the king who unites the nation. He's a complex figure, capable of great courage and compassion, but also prone to moments of weakness and sin.
David's story is a tapestry of human experience, encompassing both the heights of human achievement and the depths of human failure. His Psalms in particular capture the full range of emotions: joy, sorrow, praise, lament, anger, even doubt.
Right? He's not afraid to pour out his heart to God, to express his vulnerability and his need for forgiveness. He's a model of authentic faith, one that doesn't shy away from the complexities of human experience. And one of those complexities, of course, is his affair with Bathsheba and the subsequent cover-up that leads to the death of her husband.
It's a tragic episode that highlights the consequences of sin, even for those who are chosen by God. But it also reveals God's mercy and forgiveness. David repents of his actions, and his lineage continues, ultimately leading to the birth of the Messiah.
That idea of the messianic line is an important thread that runs throughout the Tanakh, isn't it? It's like a promise, a hope for a future king who will restore Israel and establish a reign of peace and justice.
Exactly. And that hope is further developed in the story of Solomon, David's son, who inherits the throne and becomes known for his wisdom, his wealth, and his building projects. Most notably, the first temple in Jerusalem.
The temple is such a powerful symbol, isn't it?
Yeah.
It represents the presence of God among his people, the focal point of their worship and their national identity.
Absolutely. And Solomon's reign is often seen as a golden age for Israel, a time of peace and prosperity. But even Solomon, with all his wisdom, is not immune to temptation. His many wives and foreign alliances eventually lead him astray, foreshadowing the divisions and conflicts that will plague Israel in the future.
So even at the height of their power and prosperity, there's a sense of foreshadowing, a hint of the fragility of human achievement, and the enduring power of sin to corrupt even the most righteous hearts.
And that foreshadowing comes to fruition after Solomon's death, when the kingdom splits into two, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. It's a tragic turning point, a period of political instability, religious syncretism, and ultimately the destruction of both kingdoms.
And that's where the prophets come in, right? These fiery individuals emerge as God's messengers, challenging the kings and the people to turn back to God, to live up to the covenant, and embrace a life of justice and righteousness.
Exactly. The prophets are like a chorus of conscience, calling out the hypocrisy of religious rituals that are devoid of ethical behavior. They remind the people that true worship is inseparable from caring for the poor, the oppressed, and the marginalized.
And they warn of the consequences of turning away from God and the covenant. They predict the destruction of both Israel and Judah. If the people don't repent and change their ways, it's a message that's both challenging and comforting, a reminder that God is both just and merciful.
And their message resonates throughout the books of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the 12 minor prophets, each with their own unique style and emphasis. They're poets, visionaries, and social critics, wielding words like weapons to pierce the hearts of the complacent and offer a glimmer of hope to the repentant.
It's fascinating how diverse their voices are, yet they all share this common thread: a passionate commitment to justice, a deep love for their people, and an unwavering belief in God's sovereignty, even in the face of impending doom.
And sadly, their warnings come true. The northern kingdom of Israel is conquered by the Assyrians in the 8th century BCE, and its people are scattered, lost to history. Then the southern kingdom of Judah falls to the Babylonians in the 6th century BCE. The destruction of Jerusalem and the exile of its elite to Babylon mark a pivotal moment of loss and trauma for the Jewish people.
It's a heart-wrenching chapter in their history. The temple, the symbol of God's presence, lies in ruins. Their homeland is occupied by a foreign power. It's hard to imagine the despair they must have felt, the sense of abandonment, the questioning of God's faithfulness.
And yet, even in the midst of exile, the prophets offer a message of hope. They envision a future restoration, a return to the land, and a renewed covenant relationship with God. They remind the people that God has not abandoned them, even in their darkest hour.
It's a reminder that even when everything seems lost, when faith is shaken to its core, there's still a glimmer of hope, a possibility of redemption, a promise that God is still working even in the midst of tragedy.
And that brings us to the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, which detail the return from exile and the rebuilding of Jerusalem and the temple. It's a period of both joy and challenge, as the returning exiles face opposition from neighboring peoples and internal conflicts over how to rebuild their society.
So it's not just a simple happy ending, right? The return from exile isn't a return to a perfect past. It's a new beginning, filled with its own set of challenges and opportunities.
Exactly. And the books of Ezra and Nehemiah highlight the importance of leadership, the need for unity, and the ongoing struggle to live faithfully in a world that often tempts them to compromise their values.
Okay, so we've journeyed through the grand narratives of creation, covenant, exile, and return. We've explored the complexities of leadership, the fragility of human achievement, and the enduring power of God's mercy and forgiveness. We've seen how these themes play out in the lives of individuals, families, and nations. But there's still so much more to unpack, especially in the writings, that diverse collection of poetry, wisdom literature, and philosophical reflections that make up the final section of the Tanakh.
Absolutely. The writings offer a different lens through which to view those core themes, exploring the depths of human emotion, the search for meaning, and that ongoing struggle to live faithfully in a world that doesn't always make sense.
I'm excited to dive into that next, but before we do, I'm just curious, what stood out to you the most so far? What connections have you made between the individual stories and those broader themes that we've been discussing?
I'm struck by the ongoing tension between human freedom and divine sovereignty. The Tanakh doesn't shy away from the reality of human choice, the consequences of sin, the messy realities of history, but it also affirms God's ultimate control, his ability to work through even our failings to achieve his purposes.
That's a powerful insight, and it makes me think about the cyclical nature of the narrative. The Israelites repeatedly fall into idolatry and disobedience, yet God, in his mercy, always offers a path back to redemption. It's a reminder that even when we mess up, even when we stray from the path, there's always hope for a new beginning.
Exactly. And that message of hope is woven into the very fabric of the Tanakh, pointing towards a future where God's reign of peace and justice will be fully realized. But before we delve into those messianic hopes, let's take a closer look at the writings themselves, beginning with the Book of Psalms, that treasure trove of poetry and prayer that captures the full range of human emotion.
Sounds like a perfect place to start. I'm ready to dive into the depths of the human heart, to explore those raw, honest expressions of joy, sorrow, praise, and lament that make Psalms so universally relatable. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Tanakh. We've covered a lot of ground, from the creation story to the return from exile. Exploring those grand narratives and the complexities of the law, now we're stepping into the world of the writings, this collection of books that offers a more personal, reflective perspective on faith and the human experience.
Yeah, that's what makes the writings so compelling. They invite us into the inner lives of the Israelites, to explore their struggles, their joys, their doubts, their hopes. And they offer a timeless wellspring of wisdom and insight that continues to speak to us across the centuries.
Right, it's like we're shifting from the macro to the micro, from those sweeping historical narratives to the intimate details of individual lives. And what better place to start than with the Book of Psalms, a collection of poems and prayers that capture that full spectrum of human emotion.
Psalms is like a window into the soul of the Israelite people. It's raw, honest, unfiltered. We see them pouring out their hearts to God, expressing their joy and gratitude, their anger and despair, their doubts and their unwavering faith.
And it's not just about individual emotions, is it? There are psalms that reflect the collective experience of the nation. Their lament over the destruction of Jerusalem, their longing for restoration, their hope for a future Messiah.
Exactly. Psalms gives voice to both the personal and the communal, weaving together individual experiences with the larger narrative of Israel's history and their relationship with God.
I'm thinking of Psalm 23, one of the most beloved and comforting passages in the entire Tanakh. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. It's such a beautiful expression, trust and dependence on God.
It's a powerful image, isn't it? God as a shepherd caring for his flock, guiding them, protecting them, providing for their needs. It speaks to that deep longing for security and belonging that we all share.
And it's a reminder that even in the midst of hardship, even when we feel lost and alone, God is present, offering comfort, guidance, and a sense of peace.
And then there are Psalms of lament, like Psalm 137, which expresses the anguish of exile. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? It's a poignant expression of displacement, the pain of being uprooted from their homeland, separated from what was most sacred to them.
It's heartbreaking. Yet there's also a sense of defiance, a refusal to forget their identity, their heritage. It speaks to the enduring strength of their connection to Jerusalem, to the land that God had promised them.
And that tension between despair and hope, lament and the persistent belief in God's faithfulness runs throughout Psalms. It's a reminder that faith isn't about denying the reality of suffering. It's about holding on to hope even in the midst of darkness.
And then there are psalms of praise and thanksgiving, celebrating God's greatness, his creation, his steadfast love. It's a reminder that even when we're struggling, even when we're questioning, there's always something to be grateful for, always a reason to lift our voices in praise.
And those different voices, those diverse expressions of faith, are what make Psalms so relatable, so timeless. It speaks to the human condition in all its complexity and beauty.
Okay, so we've explored the emotional depths of Psalms, that tapestry of prayer and poetry. What other treasures await us in the writings?
Well, let's turn to the wisdom literature, starting with Proverbs, a collection of pithy sayings and practical advice for living a good life.
Proverbs is like a manual for navigating the challenges of daily life, isn't it? It offers guidance on everything, from relationships and finances to work ethic and personal integrity.
Exactly. It's a treasure trove of wisdom, passed down through generations, offering insights into human nature and the consequences of our choices.
I love how it's presented in these short, memorable sayings, almost like sound bites of wisdom. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Or, go to the ant, you sluggard, consider its ways and be wise. These are words to live by.
And while some of the proverbs might seem a bit simplistic or outdated today, they still offer valuable insights into the human condition. They remind us of the importance of making wise choices, cultivating good character, and living a life that is pleasing to God.
Right. It's about aligning our lives with those principles of justice, compassion, and humility that we've been exploring throughout the Tanakh. But Proverbs also acknowledges that life isn't always fair or predictable. Sometimes bad things happen to good people.
And that brings us to the book of Job, one of the most profound and challenging books in the entire Tanakh. It's a story that grapples with that age-old question of why bad things happen to good people. Job, a righteous man, loses everything: his wealth, his health, even his children. And he's left wrestling with the meaning of suffering and the justice of God.
Job's story is so relatable, isn't it? We've all experienced lost pain, moments when we question why things happen the way they do. And Job doesn't hold back. He challenges God, demands an explanation for his suffering.
And what's interesting is that God doesn't give him a simple answer. Instead, he responds with a series of questions that highlight the vastness and mystery of creation. It's a reminder that God's ways are not always our ways, and that sometimes we have to accept that there are things we simply cannot comprehend.
It's almost as if God is inviting Job to trust in his wisdom and goodness, even when we don't understand his plan. It's a call to faith, but not a blind faith, a faith that can withstand doubt and questioning.
And ultimately, Job's faith is strengthened through his suffering. He comes to a deeper understanding of God's sovereignty and the limitations of human perspective.
It's a powerful message, especially for those who are going through difficult times. It's a reminder that even in the midst of pain and loss, there's a possibility of growth, a deepening of faith, a coming to terms with the mysteries of life.
And that exploration of the human condition continues in the book of Ecclesiastes, a deeply philosophical work that reflects on the meaning of life and the inevitability of death.
Okay, so we're going from the depths of suffering to the existential pondering of Ecclesiastes. Talk about a range. What's the main takeaway from this book?
Well, Ecclesiastes is written from the perspective of a king, traditionally identified as Solomon, who has experienced all that life has to offer: wealth, power, pleasure, wisdom. And yet he concludes that all is vanity, meaning that earthly pursuits are ultimately fleeting and unsatisfying.
That sounds a bit depressing. Is there any hope or meaning to be found in Ecclesiastes?
There is. Despite the author's somewhat cynical outlook, he ultimately concludes that the best way to live is to embrace the simple pleasures of life, to find joy in our work, our relationships, and the gifts that God has given us.
So there's a reminder to appreciate the present moment, to find meaning in the everyday, and to trust in God even when we can't understand the bigger picture. It's a message that resonates deeply even thousands of years later.
And then we have Song of Songs, a collection of love poetry that celebrates the beauty and passion of romantic love. It's a unique book in the Tanakh, with its sensual imagery and frank exploration of human desire.
Wait, love poetry in the Bible? That's not something you hear about every day.
It's true, and it's been a subject of debate and interpretation for centuries. Some scholars see it as a purely allegorical work, symbolizing God's love for his people. Others see it as a celebration of human love, a reminder that physical intimacy is a gift from God to be enjoyed within the context of marriage.
Either way, it's a fascinating departure from the more law-focused or prophetic books we've encountered so far. It's a reminder that the Tanakh embraces the fullness of human experience, including love, passion, and desire. It's about celebrating life in all its richness and complexity.
And that celebration of life is intertwined with the awareness of loss and the need for remembrance. That's where the Book of Lamentations comes in. It's a collection of poems mourning the destruction of Jerusalem, expressing the profound grief and sense of abandonment that the people felt after the Babylonian conquest.
It's raw, it's powerful, it's a testament to the depth of their sorrow. But even in the midst of lament, there's a glimmer of hope, a belief that God will ultimately restore his people and bring them back to their land.
Exactly. Lamentations isn't just about wallowing in grief, it's about processing pain, acknowledging loss, and clinging to the hope of a future restoration.
And that hope of restoration is woven into the stories of Esther, Ruth, and Daniel, each offering a unique perspective on Jewish identity and resilience in the face of adversity.
Esther's story takes place in Persia, centuries after the Babylonian exile. She's a Jewish woman who becomes queen, hiding her identity until a plot to annihilate the Jews forces her to act courageously, risking her own life to save her people.
It's a story of courage, about standing up for what's right, even when it's dangerous. And it's a reminder that God can work through unexpected people and circumstances to bring about deliverance.
And Ruth's story is a testament to loyalty, kindness, and unexpected redemption. She's a Moabite woman who chooses to follow her Israelite mother-in-law back to Bethlehem, even though it means leaving everything she knows behind. Her faithfulness is rewarded as she finds love and a place within the Israelite community, becoming an ancestor of King David.
It's a beautiful story about the power of love to transcend boundaries of culture and religion, and it shows that God's grace extends to all who seek him with sincere hearts, regardless of their background.
And then there's Daniel, a young man living in exile in Babylon. Known for his wisdom, his integrity, and his unwavering faith, he interprets dreams for kings, faces down lions in a den, and receives apocalyptic visions that reveal God's plan for history.
Daniel's story is full of drama and intrigue, and it speaks to the challenges of maintaining one's faith and identity in a hostile environment. It's a reminder that even when surrounded by pressures to conform, we can stay true to our values and trust in God's protection.
And his apocalyptic visions offer a glimpse into the future, a time when God's kingdom will be fully established and evil will be vanquished. It's a message of hope and encouragement for those who are suffering, reminding them that God is in control even when things seem chaotic and unpredictable.
And finally, we come to Chronicles, a retelling of Israelite history from a priestly perspective, emphasizing the importance of the Davidic monarchy, the temple in Jerusalem, and the continuity of God's covenant with his people.
Chronicles serves as a reminder of God's faithfulness throughout history, offering comfort and encouragement to those returning from exile, assuring them that God's promises are true and that he will ultimately restore his people to their former glory.
Wow, what a journey this has been. We've explored the vastness of the Tanakh, from the creation story to the visions of a future restoration. We've encountered a cast of characters who embody the best and worst of human nature, and we've grappled with timeless questions about faith, suffering, and the meaning of life.
And through it all, we've seen the hand of God at work, guiding history, shaping destiny, and offering hope and redemption to his people. The Tanakh is more than just an ancient text. It's a living testament to the enduring power of faith, the resilience of the human spirit, and the boundless love and grace of God.
It's been an incredible deep dive, and I feel like I've gained a much deeper appreciation for the richness and complexity of this sacred text. There's so much to unpack, so much to ponder, and I know I'll be revisiting these stories and teachings for years to come.
I couldn't agree more. The Tanakh is a gift that keeps on giving, offering new insights and challenges with each reading. It's an invitation to engage with the depths of human experience, to wrestle with the big questions, and to deepen our understanding of our relationship with God and with each other.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Tanakh. We hope it sparked your curiosity and inspired you to explore this extraordinary text for yourself. Until next time, keep those pages turning